The silent drifter. The wind over Kestral IV never stopped moving. It hissed through broken shutters and groaned against the rusted plates of the auction hall's dome, carrying the dry grit of the desert like a warning. The people inside had learned to ignore it. Men and women in dust-stained coats, traders with their ledgers, alien syndicate representatives in shimmering veils, all crowded shoulder to shoulder around the stage. The bidding was already underway. Jace Mallory stood near the back. Hat brim low, duster coat drawn tight, he looked like another nameless drifter waiting for his turn to sell a cargo of hides or buy new ammunition. He didn't speak. He rarely did. The quiet let him listen. The auctioneer, a four-armed Ketheri with teeth filed to points, was making a show of the next lot. Lot 17, prime Lissari stock. Strong, educated, and trained in 3 languages. Contract term, indefinite. 2 armored guards rolled the cage forward. Inside, the girl sat cross-legged, hands bound in pale synth cord. Her hair, if it could be called that, was a fall of fine silver filaments, catching the harsh yellow lights. Blue-white patterns rippled faintly along her cheekbones and throat, shifting like reflections on water. She did not lower her gaze as the crowd leaned forward. She met their stares head-on, expression cold. Jace had heard about the Lissari before. Traders called them the starlight kind, graceful, intelligent, and dangerously rare this far from their homeworld. Owning one was a status symbol in Syndicate circles. Selling one, well, that meant you either had the power to keep her or the desperation to cash her in. The first bid came from a merchant with gold rings stacked up his thick fingers. Another from a tall insectoid whose voice clicked like pebbles. Numbers rose quickly, climbing into the thousands of gold press credits. Jay stayed where he was. The girl's eyes swept the crowd once, passed over him, then returned. A flicker of something, not recognition exactly, but interest, crossed her face. Then the auctioneer's voice cut through. 3,000. Do I hear 3-2? A burly man in a red coat raised his hand. 3-2. 3-5. Someone barked. Jace exhaled once through his nose, stepped forward, and let a pouch drop onto the table before the auctioneer. The Ketheri's black eyes narrowed. And you are? Jace tilted his head just enough to let the brim lift from his face. For 1,000, he said. Just 2 words. Clear, calm, final. The hall went quiet. 4,000 was more than most earned a season. It wasn't the amount that silenced them, though. It was the man saying it. Some recognized him now. The drifter who'd taken down a dozen bounty targets without backup, who never drank with the locals, who walked away from jobs with his pay and nothing more. The auctioneer glanced at the other bidders. None answered. Sold, the Ketheri hissed. A moment later, the guards unlocked the cage and shoved the Lissari forward. She stumbled once, caught herself, and straightened. When the auctioneer handed the contract tablet over, Jace didn't look at it. He just took her by the elbow and steered her toward the exit. They stepped out into the glare of the late afternoon sun. Heat rose in shimmering waves off the Ferrocrete Street. Jace's grav horse, a long-legged machine with sand-colored plating, waited by the hitch rail. He swung up into the saddle, then glanced down at her. Well, he said. She hesitated. You're human. Last I checked, you bought my contract. That's what they called it. Why? Jace looked past her at the crowd spilling out of the auction hall. Too many eyes. Too many ears. He offered her his hand. After a pause, she took it, and he pulled her up behind him. They rode through the outskirts of the settlement, past half-buried wind turbines and rusted-out cargo haulers. The wind picked up, rattling loose sheet metal. The horizon shimmered with heat haze. She spoke again, voice low. There were others bidding. I noticed. They would have. She cut herself off, jaw tightening. You don't even know who I am. Jace kept his eyes on the trail. Didn't like the look of the men bidding, he said finally. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the grav horse repulsors. The settlement shrank behind them until it was a smudge against the endless sand. At last she said, My name is Sira Vera. Jace nodded once. Jace Mallory. And what will you do with me? Jace Mallory. The question hung in the dry air, sharp as a blade. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he eased the grav horse toward a narrow canyon where the wind dropped and shadows stretched long. First, he said, we put some distance between us and that place. She studied him in profile, searching for something. Maybe it was the way he didn't gloat. Maybe it was that he never once looked at her the way the bidders had. Whatever it was, she said nothing more as the canyon walls rose around them. Above, the first stars were beginning to show through the thin sky. Sandstorms and secrets. The canyon walls funneled them west, shadows stretching like long fingers over the sand. The wind had dropped here, but the air was heavy, close, the kind that made a man keep an eye on the sky. Jace knew the signs. A sandstorm was building somewhere beyond the horizon. Syrah sat behind him on the grav horse, her grip light on the side rail. She hadn't spoken since giving her name. He'd seen that look before, someone measuring their odds, deciding whether to run, to fight, or to trust. He didn't fault her for it. By nightfall, the first low rumbles rolled through the air. A faint line of darkness had begun to rise on the eastern edge of the world. Jace angled the grav horse toward higher ground. If the storm caught them in the open, it would strip flesh from bone. They reached the mouth of an old mining station, half collapsed into the canyon wall. Its metal skin was pitted with decades of grit, but the blast doors were still intact. Jace dismounted, keyed the manual override, and forced the doors open just enough to slip inside. The place smelled of dust and rust, but the walls would hold. He stabled the grav horse in the corner, then dropped his pack onto a bench. Syrah stood near the doorway, watching the dark line on the horizon swell. You've done this before, she said. A few times. Rescuing strangers from Syndicate markets? Jace shook his head. Surviving storms. Her eyes flicked toward the growing wall of grit. You risked yourself for me. For someone you don't know. Why? He unstrapped his coat and hung it over a broken rail. Don't much care for seeing people in cages. That's all. That's enough. She gave a small, humorless laugh. You think you've done me a kindness. You don't know what you've bought into. Jace met her gaze. Then tell me. Instead, she sat on a crate and said nothing. The storm hit an hour later, the wind screaming like something alive. Dust found its way through every crack, turning the air inside to a faint haze. Jace lit a lantern, its glow throwing long shadows across the metal walls. Syrah pulled her knees up to her chest, the shifting light catching on the faint bioluminescent patterns along her neck. He'd heard Lissari markings reflected mood. These were sharp, restless lines. You planning to run once the storm passes? He asked. Her lips curved slightly. Would you stop me? Wouldn't be much point in buying your freedom just to chain it back up. She tilted her head. You call it freedom, but you still hold the contract. Paper's only worth what a man's willing to enforce. It seemed to catch her off guard. She studied him for a long moment, then said, Most humans I've met talk too much. You don't talk at all. Waste a breath. Outside, something heavy slammed against the wall, a shard of rock carried by the wind. Jace glanced toward the door, hand resting near the grip of his sidearm. Old habits. Syrah noticed. Expecting someone, don't like surprises. The words had barely left his mouth before the sound came. A faint scrape against the outer door. Not the wind. Jace drew his pistol, motioned for her to stay down, and moved to the entrance. Another scrape, then the hiss of a cutting tool. He dropped to one knee beside the door and waited. The tool's sound stopped. A second later, the panel shifted inward. A hand reached through, scaled, clawed, followed by the muzzle of a cheap blaster. Jace fired once. The blaster clattered to the floor outside. A strangled hiss followed, and the shadow retreated into the storm. Jace slammed the door shut again. Syrah was already on her feet, eyes wide. They're after me. Seems that way. They'll keep coming. I've had worse company. She stared at him, then looked down. You don't even know why. Don't need to. If someone wants you bad enough to kill for it, that's reason enough to keep you close until I figure out why. For a moment, she seemed to consider telling him something, then shook her head. It's dangerous for you to know. Jace holstered his pistol and sat back on the bench. Danger doesn't care what you know. The storm raged on through the night. Eventually, Syrah laid down near the lantern, her breathing steadying. Jace stayed awake, listening to the wind, the scrape of sand, the distant echo of something moving outside. He kept one hand on the grip of his pistol. Near dawn, the worst of the storm passed. Light filtered through cracks in the door. Syra stirred, her markings fading to a calmer glow. She looked at him, eyes unreadable. "You're not just some drifter, are you?" He shrugged. "Depends who's asking." Her gaze lingered, as though she could read answers from the lines on his face. Then she said quietly, "You're not what I expected." Jace pushed himself to his feet and began saddling the grav horse. "Good. Means I've got the advantage." They stepped back into the canyon, the air sharp with the clean scent that came after a storm. Tracks in the sand led away from the station, clawed feet, moving fast. Whoever had come for her would be back. Jace glanced at the trail, then at Syra. "Best we keep moving." She fell in a step beside him. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," he said, swinging into the saddle. "But not today." They rode on, the sun climbing over the rim of the canyon, chasing their shadows west. The price of freedom. By midday, the canyon opened into the wide flats, a cracked salt plain stretching toward the hazy mountains. The sun was sharp enough to burn through coat and hat. Jace set a steady pace on the grav horse, eyes scanning the horizon. Out here, sound carried for miles, and danger had a habit of riding quiet. Syra sat behind him, the heat doing little to dim the glow of the faint markings along her jaw. She hadn't spoken since they left the mining station. He figured she was thinking about the tracks they'd seen in the sand. So was he. When they stopped at a dry riverbed to water the grav horse, she finally said, "They won't stop." "Could be," Jace replied. "They will follow us until they have me back. The Syndicate always gets what it wants." Jace glanced at her. "Not always." She crouched near the shallow pool, running her fingers through the surface. "You think you can outrun them?" "You can't." "Not trying to outrun them." That made her look up. "Then what are you trying to do?" "Figure out why they want you bad enough to send men into a sandstorm for it." She studied him for a long moment. The shifting light in her eyes seemed to hesitate, as though weighing something. Then she stood and stepped closer. "I'm a mind key," she said quietly. "Do you know the word?" Jace shook his head. "In my people's history, the Lissari were guides, navigators, mediators, and in rare cases, keys. We can interface directly with machines left behind by the ancients. Machines your kind has only begun to understand." "Ancients," Jace said. "You mean the precursors?" She nodded. "On Kestral IV, there's a vault buried deep under the sands, older than both our civilizations. The Syndicate believes I can open it. What's inside? No one knows for certain. Power, knowledge, weapons, or nothing at all. But they believe it's worth killing for." Jace pulled his hat lower against the glare. "And what do you believe?" "That it is dangerous," she said. "If I open it, they will use whatever is inside to control this world. If I refuse, they will kill me." He nodded once, slowly. "So your choice is between dying and doing their work." Her eyes narrowed. "That's why you should leave me. You have no reason to share this burden." Jace cinched the water flask and stowed it in the saddlebag. "If I was the kind to leave people behind, I'd have done it yesterday." The words seemed to land heavier than he intended. Syra didn't speak again until they were back on the trail. They made camp in a shallow basin that night. Jace built the fire low, shielding its light from the surrounding ridges. He'd seen no sign of pursuit since morning, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. Syra sat across from him, knees drawn up, watching the fire. "You're changing," she said suddenly. Jace raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You speak more now than when I met you. You ask questions. You care. Maybe I just like knowing the odds." She tilted her head. "You could sell my contract back to them. You'd get more than you paid." "Not interested." "Why?" Jace poked the coals with a stick. "Because I don't sell people." She gave a small, incredulous laugh. "You sound like someone who has lost before." "Everyone's lost something," he said. "Some of us just remember it better." For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Syra's head snapped up, her markings flaring bright. "Someone's close," she whispered. Jace was already on his feet, pistol in hand. He caught the faint crunch of boots on rock, then the gleam of eyes in the dark. Three figures emerged from the shadows, Syndicate mercs in piecemeal armor. The leader, a broad-shouldered human with a scar down his face, stepped forward. "Mallory," he said, "you've got something that doesn't belong to you." Jace didn't move. "Ain't yours either." The leader's smile was humorless. "Hand her over, and you walk away." Before Jace could answer, Syrah stood, her eyes fixed on the men. The air seemed to tighten around them, a pressure building just beneath the skin. The nearest merc took a step back, hand twitching toward his weapon, then froze mid-motion, eyes glassy. Jace recognized the signs of someone whose mind had been scrambled. The other two hesitated just long enough for him to move. He fired twice, dropping them before they could recover. When it was over, Syrah swayed, catching herself on a rock. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "It takes more than I like to use that ability." Jace holstered his pistol and helped her back to the fire. "You just saved my life." Her gaze met his, steady despite her exhaustion. "And you saved mine." He gave a faint smile. "Seems we're in this together now." They broke camp before dawn, riding hard toward the mountains. The air was cooler here, the scent of stone and scrub replacing the endless salt. As the first light touched the peaks, Syrah said softly, "You didn't have to stay." "Maybe not," Jace replied. "But I'm not the man I was when I walked into that auction." She studied him for a moment, as if seeing something shift in his face. "You're changing," she repeated. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I'm just remembering who I used to be." They rode on, the trail winding upward, the vault's secret waiting somewhere ahead. And with it, the choice that could change more than just the two of them. The vault and the choice. By the third day in the mountains, the trail turned steep and narrow. The Gravhorse engines hummed low as it climbed the switchbacks, stone walls pressing in on either side. Far below, the desert spread out like a faded map, its scars of old riverbeds and forgotten roads lost in the haze. Syrah guided him with quiet precision, her gaze fixed on the ridges ahead. "Another half day," she said. "The vault is under a basalt ridge that faces the dawn." Jace glanced at her. "You've been here before?" "In my mind," she replied. "The Lissari teach keys, our potential vault sites. We never go to them. We are taught they're dangerous. Guess we'll find out if your teachers were right." She didn't answer. They reached the ridge at dusk. A sheer wall of black rock rose from the canyon floor, its face unbroken, except for a narrow fissure at its base. Syrah dismounted and placed her hand against the stone. Her markings brightened, pulsing in rhythm with her breathing. The fissure widened. Stone dust sifted down like ash, and an opening formed, tall enough for a man to walk through. Cold air breathed out of the darkness. Jace stepped inside after her, hand resting on the grip of his pistol. The tunnel sloped downward, walls smooth and curved. Light came not from the lantern in his hand, but from faint lines in the stone, glowing the same pale blue as Syrah's markings. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened into a chamber unlike anything Jace had seen. It was perfectly round, the walls etched with symbols that seemed to shift if you looked too long. In the center stood a pillar of black crystal, suspended above the floor by nothing at all. Syrah approached it slowly. "This is what they want." "What is it?" "I think it's a seed." Jace frowned. "Like a plant. Like a world," she said. "Given the right environment, it could terraform Kestral IV in decades instead of centuries. Or," she hesitated, "it could strip it to bare rock in days. And the Syndicate wants the choice." She nodded. A sharp voice cut through the chamber. "We'll take it from here." They turned. The scar-faced merc from the basin stood in the tunnel entrance, flanked by half a dozen armed men. Their weapons gleamed in the blue light. "Step away from the artifact," the merc said. "You've done your part, Lissari. You can live if you leave now." Syrah's eyes flicked to Jace. He shifted his stance, hand hovering near his holster. "Not gonna happen." The merc's smile was thin. "I've read your file, Mallory. You work for pay. How about I double whatever she gave you?" "Wasn't for pay," Jace said. Before the merc could reply, Jace moved. The chamber erupted in noise and light. Jace's first shot dropped the man to the merc's right. Syrah ducked behind the crystal pillar, her hands on the base, sending a shockwave through the floor. Two more mercs stumbled, their weapons skittering away. Jace used the confusion, moving with sharp precision. Each step measured, each shot placed where it mattered. Years of bounty work had taught him to think 2 moves ahead. The mercs fought like a unit. He fought like a man who refused to lose. A blaster bolt grazed his arm, burning through his coat. He ignored it, pivoted, and put a round through the shooter's chest. The last 2 men broke and ran, their footsteps fading into the tunnel. Silence returned, broken only by the faint hum of the crystal. Syrah emerged from behind the pillar, her face pale. "They'll bring more. Then we finish this," Jace said. Her hands hovered over the pillar's surface. "Once I trigger the self-seal, no one will ever open this vault again. Not even me." "You sure?" "Yes. It's the only way to keep it out of their hands." Jace looked at the crystal, this strange, floating promise of life and destruction. "Do it." She closed her eyes. Her markings flared bright, the same rhythm echoing through the lines on the walls. The hum deepened. The air grew heavy, as though the chamber itself was sinking into the earth. When she opened her eyes again, the fissure they'd entered through was gone. Only smooth stone remained. "It's done," she said softly. Outside, night had fallen. The stars blazed sharp and cold above the ridge. Jace led the grav horse to a flat stretch of ground, the mountains at their back. Syrah stood beside him, looking out at the dark desert. "You could have left me at any point," she said. "Could have," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" He thought about it for a moment. "Guess I got tired of walking away." She studied him. "When I met you, you were closed, like you'd buried yourself. Maybe I had. And now?" Jace gave her a faint smile. "Now I've got something worth riding toward." She tilted her head, a rare softness in her voice. "You didn't just rescue me, Jace. You rescued yourself." He tipped his hat. "Guess we're even then." They mounted up and rode into the dark, 2 silhouettes against the starlit sands. A quiet cowboy and the alien he'd saved, carrying nothing from the vault but the choice they'd made together. Somewhere far behind them, the desert swallowed the vault, and with it, the future the Syndicate would never control.